Hi, my name's Robin Tippet. I'll be the discussion leader for this week. I am very excited to present this topic. I found a lot of things really interesting. I hope that this PowerPoint is just the beginning of an ongoing discussion this week. I look forward to seeing what your take was on the articles and the answers to the questions. I also look forward to promoting that discussion, and hopefully I can answer some questions as well as you answer some questions for me. The first thing that popped out to me was the World Englishes subcategory, and many students learn English as a second language in many parts of the world. There are many different forms of the English language that are taught, and below are a few regional categories that would affect how English is taught and learned. So I went ahead and just pulled this graphic straight from the article, and it talks about these circle bands and how English kind of works in each of those categories. The first one is the inside, right here, the inner circle. And here is where the countries and the regions that have English as the native language of the majority of the people. So not just where English is spoken, but where the majority of people speak English. And this would be places like the USA, where we currently live, and then the UK is another example. The outer circle would be countries where English has had a long history of use and local L2 varieties have been developed. So if you read the article, it talks about a lot of countries that maybe have kind of two languages going on, where if you went and spoke English in that country, you would be able to communicate without knowing one of the other languages that are spoken there. And so examples they gave of countries for the outer circle were India and Singapore. And then there's the expanding circle, and this is countries where English is dominant, but it's dominant as a foreign language, and it's used for limited domains. So if you think like a job in the future where people might need to translate and speak to other countries for trading or different businesses, this is where you would learn English to speak to people in different countries, that either in the USA where the majority speaks English, or somewhere like India where they also speak English. And then they kind of use that as a bridge to communicate. That bridge to communicate is known as lingua franca, and I actually looked up how to say this. And so when I looked it up, they actually gave me the way they pronounce it in the US and the way they pronounce it in the UK. So hopefully you can hear this, but the way it's pronounced in the US is like this.
Lingua franca.
And the way that it's pronounced in the UK is like this. If I can get it to push.
Lingua franca. Lingua franca.
There you go. That was a little bit hard to push, but you can hear just the difference. In the Franca one's a little bit more, I guess the A is held out a little bit, and the N changes a little bit, but even between two, I guess, inner circle countries, this is pronounced differently too. So I just thought that was kind of interesting. The use of English language is a common means of communication for speakers of different languages. So like the example that I just gave before about a country like India, where they would learn English as a means to communicate with, say, like a country like China, who would also learn English as a way to communicate, even though they have their own languages that they would speak in their countries. This term is explained through an example between the writing of a letter between the individual in Japan and the individual in France. So there's another example of this in the article. English is used as a common language between many cultures as a means to communicate and do business. EFL features when non-native speakers of different first languages attempt to communicate while using English, some parts of the language are left out. These parts do not make make understanding the content completely impossible, but are not complete in grammar and structure. And so I think a lot of us, if you are a teacher in the classroom and you're teaching any students that English is not their first language, whether they're bilingual or ESL, you'll see a lot of these features in their writing and in the way that they speak, and so they leave out little things or change things, and you still get the gist of their of the point that they're trying to make or the idea that they're trying to get across, but it's just not complete grammar. And so this would be important when you're grading something like TELPAS. I know that many schools in Texas do TELPAS. We have a huge bilingual program and ESL program. So TELPAS is a very big deal at our school. And so this would be something that we would look at our students for before they were exiting or before they were moving up levels in their TELPAS level. Some of these examples would include using relative pronouns interchangeably, omitting articles, so just not using and, or for, and then inserting redundant prepositions. ESL pronunciation curriculum. Because 70% of communication breakdowns were discovered to be caused by pronunciation or accent differences, Jenkins identified and created a set of standards needing to be mastered for the success in learning the correct pronunciation of the English language. Sounds are both hard to teach as well to learn, and many times those who learn English will teach other English as well using the pronunciation that they have. For instance, if I learned English in another country, if that teacher had an accent, I would probably say those words the same way that that teacher said those words. And then if I was to teach somebody later, I would teach them that pronunciation too. So Jenkins kind of came up with this curriculum to make learning English a little bit more cohesive. And so some things that he had, that he put in his curriculum were the two TH sounds, the dark L, exact differences in vowel quality, pitch movement or tone, word stress, and stress timing. Incentives to learn English. As discussed in McKay's article, there are several common incentives for other language speakers to learn English. Some of these reasons are to promote and share happenings in the world for change. One of the really good examples was about the Afghan refugees from Pakistan and being able to communicate these hardships that were happening to them, the abuse that was happening, and just the unfair treatment that was happening to these refugees. And so by learning English, they were able to speak to a wider variety of individuals and really get their message out and get help more than if they were to only speak just one language. It's also the language of science, and then also to immigrate to an English-speaking country. So I think here, if you come to the USA, where we live, we are very accommodating to Spanish speakers, and I think a couple other languages, but not every other language. So if you are able to learn English, then there's more people that can communicate, and you are able to communicate a little bit better. But again, I think that in our general area in Houston, we are so diverse. We try to do a good job of being able to accommodate. I know if you go into Chinatown, you'll see street signs with Chinese. If you walk into a classroom at my school, you'll see things written in English and Spanish. But it certainly does make it easier to communicate if everybody has that bridge of being able to speak English. To take distant learning classes online. So we're currently in an online program, but there are people who are in online programs who live in a totally different country, and that's really the cool thing about technology now, is that we can do that. But if you're taking a course that's taught in English, then you're going to want to be able to read, write, and speak in English, and so that's another incentive to learn. The role and identity in language learning. Many times students are not able to express themselves in English due to the language barrier, and teachers modify their lesson to include what their learners know about to teach the main idea. I know that I do this a lot for my students. Although I only teach ESL, I do have some students who, because their home survey was filled out that they speak English in the home, they don't go into the bilingual program, but they still really have a really hard time understanding what I'm saying, and the vocabulary in both science and social studies is very difficult. I also teach math, but I find that the vocabulary in social studies and science is a lot more difficult. So I have to modify my lesson, meaning I've got to include pictures, I've got to include graphic organizers, I have to slow down. Sometimes I have to front load that vocabulary or send it home so that they can practice. And so it takes a little bit more work on my part, but it really does make the biggest difference. When the examples given throughout the lesson are uncommon for ESL or bilingual students, these learners tend to be less likely to participate in the lesson. So if they don't understand me and I don't stop to talk to them and make sure that they're on board with me and they understand, typically I feel like they would just not want to participate. They wouldn't feel comfortable raising their hand and asking a question. And I think it kind of gets overwhelming. So really modifying that lesson, or accommodating for them, I guess is a better word to use, would really help them in being successful in your class. Because when these students do not feel confident to participate in a class discussion, they can often suffer socially because they are not comfortable with the language. And this can work in reverse as well. Technology and learning language. Technology adds the benefit of isolating the English language by the category of that individual's interest. Joining a group on social media that has the same interests can give language learners more confidence because they have a better chance of understanding. Another benefit of technology is the response time is much slower and less focused on the language learner at the time of the response. So a lot of times students will struggle with vocabulary in class and those academic discussions, but I've noticed that they can communicate on Facebook and Twitter and all these other social medias. And it's usually in a group of people that have a common interest with them. So if they have a group that's I love Minecraft, well, they know all that vocabulary because Minecraft interests them. So they are working to learn that vocabulary because it's fun. So if I can put that technology element in my lesson and make it fun, then they're more likely to do better. And then I think also too, because their response time is lower, so they can stop and think about what they want to respond with and also how. And then this is just a TED Talk that I found. I think it's really interesting. It's on this topic. I love TED Talks. And just watch it if you have some spare time. It's not that long. And then my classroom experience, I've already talked a lot about in this presentation, and I have a lot of different students, and I have a lot of different experience with this, and I didn't even realize that the term Lingua Franca was what was happening, but they are speaking English to bridge the gap, because I have some students who speak Cantonese, some students who speak Arabic, and they're able to communicate with each other by speaking English. And then the questions, our professor posted those. Since I was first, she went ahead and helped me with those questions, and they're already posted. Again, I look forward to your discussion and what you have to say and some new ideas, and hopefully I can be of some help too. Thank you so much for allowing me to be your discussion leader. Goodbye.